eterno. No existen límites, solo estaba eterno, solo estaba eterno. Sabor. La tierra es órbita espiral con metes sin cesar. La paz está en la mar, nuestra conciencia, el soñar. El silencio es bello, pero la música es divina.
Hi, this is Chris Nicholas, and I disorganize this mess. Some folks call me Uncle Staple. Here's Rafael Navarro, creator of Sonambulo. Tell him your dreams.
Rafael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, first tell us please, who is Sonambulo?
Sonambulo is a masked Mexican wrestler, a luchador in terms, a former masked Mexican wrestler who now resides in the private eye. Although off the record, he's more of a paranormal investigator. The character pretty much starts off on a typical missing person sort of a thing, and one thing leads to another, and he finds a cult of the living dead living in the woody hills of California, or somebody resurrecting demons from incantations found in bubblegum machines and God knows what else.
Now, how did you first come up with the idea of the character?
Sonambulo in Spanish means the sleepwalker. In the 50s, when he was a wrestler, that was his old wrestling name. As to where he came from, which is kind of funny, he came from my dreams. And in my dream, I had this image where this mysterious person was coming back from obviously a gunfight or something, bleeding, and it was dark in his office and everything. Picture your little noir images that you'd see on Howard Hawk films and everything.
Right.
And you'd see little bits and pieces of who he is, a hulking, scary man, but at the same time a very noble and kind man. But you never see his face. He dresses his wound up and everything, right? And in my dream, he walks out the door, and just as he's about to close the door, he turns back to the neon sign. He looks outside, the light hits him perfectly, and in my dream, I remember it was a masked Mexican wrestling mask. I woke up the next morning, and I drew it in my sketchbook, and that's where the germ of an idea came to be. I grew up Latino in Los Angeles. You have that perfect equation of the American culture and the Latino culture. Outside you speak the country you speak in, but in here you remember you are of a Latin American culture. So I was taught to speak both languages. But with that also came the love of many things, music and culture. And then came superheroes. In Mexico, there's comic books of all sorts and fancies, but the masked Mexican wrestler is it's like the samurai to to Japan, or the cowboy is to the American myth. I mean, they're basically where the tall tales come from, and the masked Mexican wrestler is supposed to be the man of the people, the average man who is thrust upon bigger, greater things, If you remember your Joseph Campbell, if he only had a mask, So at that point, anybody can be, larger than life, so to speak.
Were there any wrestlers in particular who inspired you?
Oh gosh, well, I like to term these three as the Holy Trinity, but El Santo, El Mascarado de Plata, he's the basically the father and the son. I'm going to sound really blasphemous. His Blue Demon is his opponent, but at the same time they're allies. And third but not least is Mil Máscaras. He's the man of 1,000, but he's the young guy of the group. Those three guys, I think they were the major influence in me and for the creation of Sonambulo, without question. No, actually most masked Mexican wrestler gimmicks and such always come from those three. Originally, Santo got his from an old wrestler from Canada named the Masked Marvel. Actually, it was turn of the century. I think it was 1880, 1890 or so. And I believe his mask was made of pig skin. Believe it or not. And I believe he was technically the very first masked Mexican wrestler. In Mexico, I think the fascination with donning a mask to grapple, I guess, so to speak, to hide your enmity, came from comic strips that were coming from America, actually Australia as well too. Things like the Phantom became such a big, iconic image for Mexico to undertake, and somewhere down the line in the mid to late 40s, people began to wear masks, most notably El Santo.
What significance do masked wrestlers play both when they're wrestling and in movies in Latino culture?
Unlike American wrestling, it seems to be more out of just sheer masculinity and testosterone. I have to admit, the lucha libre approach to mass Mexican wrestling is very soap opera-y. Like, it's a good representation of the fight between good versus evil. It is actually it's probably the most unique interpretation. There's no gray matter. It's just, you're either good or you're bad. Good meaning técnico. There's a term for them. The good guys are known as the técnicos. The term coming from the fight with technical skills. There's certain, devices and holds that are very traditional and honorable, and the submission holds are basically what is taught to them. Whereas the rudos, which means rude and unruly, have no time for such things. They figure, just pin them down one way or another. There's no ifs and or buts. It's do or die. It's real gimmicky and it's really soap opera like. But then again, so are comics. And lucha libre to me, it's like early Marvel comics to me. It taught me all the good, right, noble things that one has to strive for.
Chris Moreno is the artist on Dracula vs. King Arthur, and he also created our mascot, Staplegator.
How did you get your start in the industry?
My mother had brought home a flyer from a local comic book shop where a local comic book artist named Tommy Castillo was holding a comic book art class. Up until that point, I'd just drawn throughout high school and growing up and never really had any focus or direction. I brought just a handful of my stuff over to the class. Tommy took me on as his student, saw that I had some potential, and then took me on as his assistant. And I would do such glamorous things as make him iced tea and walk his dog and answer his phone and tell people he wasn't there and that kind of thing. But also a lot of what I was doing was I was carrying his stuff at conventions and sitting with him at the table and really seeing what he did. It was really great on-the-job training kind of thing, and it led to my first work. He introduced me to a writer named Tony DiGirolamo, who was self-publishing a few books and had some artists that bailed on him and needed someone on a project. Tommy was kind of out of his price range at the time, and he recommended me. So I gave Tony some samples, and he liked them enough to give me a shot on my first book, The Travelers.
Cool. So what do you believe has been the most critical element to your success?
Discipline, I'd say. Just being able to get up every day and motivate yourself to work.
Right.
I try to keep a 9-to-5 work ethic, even though I'm not working a 9-to-5 job. It's just determination. I mean, I made up my mind that, no matter what anybody said, I was going to do it, So I'm doing it.
What inspired you to do Dracula versus King Arthur?
Well, I was approached by the guys who created Dracula versus King Arthur, Adam and Chris Baranek. They run Silent Devil Productions in addition to developing their own properties, basically. And the company kind of sprang from them needing to put out books on their own, and they just kind of became the guys in charge. They had seen some of the samples I was shopping around and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a new project for them. And initially they wanted me on another one of their books, but then, threw this Dracula versus King Arthur idea my way, and the first thing I thought was, why hasn't anybody done this before? And the second thought was, how soon can I start getting on this? So it kind of just sprang from there.
What would you say is the moment where you could say you've definitely made it?
I mean, for me, my goals weren't as high as, I wasn't looking to take over the comic book industry overnight. I wasn't looking to make rock star money and that kind of thing. I really just wanted to make comics. So, the minute I got my first issue working on The Travelers, to me, that was like the hugest. But
yeah.
The strange thing was that was my goal. So after you realize that one goal, like, where do you go from there? What's the new goal? So, I've still been kind of trying to figure that out. But I mean, I'm actually having a good time basically living the initial dream, which is getting published and staying published. So I guess that's kind of the new goal.
Here's Drew Edwards, creator of Halloween Man. He's got really great hair.
Halloween Man. Tell us about the book. Tell us about the characters.
The comic is sort of the bastard child of Sam Raimi from the 80s, Stan Lee from the 60s, and Rob Zombie. Psychobilly splatterpunk retro Silver Age comic with lots of jokes and gore and monsters and zombies and all that fun stuff. Our main character is Solomon Hitch. He is a young man who has been resurrected as a flesh-eating monster powered by classic horror films and a taste for living flesh. He has the power of the horror movie sequel, meaning that he can never die. He will take a licking, keep on kicking. Picture kind of a hybrid of Jason and Spider-Man, if you will. You know, if your classic horror movie monster stopped killing teenagers and started turning on all the bad guys. He has a beautiful, sexy, mad scientist pinup girlfriend. Her name is Lucy. She is the beauty to his beast, or maybe that's vice versa. I don't know. I get that confused sometimes. There's also Man-Goat, who has the powers of a man-sized goat. Proportionate strength, speed, and agility of a goat. Remember that, kids. Then there is Morlack, who is a broken down wizard that I based pretty much on George Carlin because I OD'd on the Bill and Ted movies as a kid. So I figured instead of doing the Obi-Wan Gandalf vibe, I think it'd be better to have like a rehab hippie as the mentor figure. And then there is Nicodemus Mousefriend, the quote-unquote normal guy who is a Rastafarian ska kid who runs a occult bookstore. And he is, I'd like to think, the one relatable character in this cast of kooks because he's the only guy that's not he's the only guy that's a normal person. That's supposed to be the gateway character. I don't know if it's worked out that well, but I like him. He's probably the character that's the most actually like me out of the entire book.
How did you come up with these characters? What did you have a process, or did they just suddenly occur to you? How did that work out?
Well, I mean, you may have guessed by my babbling by now, but I'm a bit of a pop culture junkie. I love comic books and monster movies and rock music, and I've always made up my own superhero characters, even as a little kid. And a consistent one because like I can never really get into like Superman or Batman because they remind me a little bit too much of the guys who used to pick on me in high school. I always relate the characters more like you know, like the Creeper or the Thing, where they were these, you know, they were monsters, but they were superheroes at the same time, and they were kind of, their powers kind of sucked. They didn't enjoy being a superhero particularly much, and that's more or less what I was into. That's what I was drawn to. I also like Monster Hunter characters. Like I really love Ghostbusters and Vampire Hunter D and everything like that. And sort of over the years, I guess, all of this different influence is just sort of regurgitated or was spliced together kind of like my own Frankenstein monster into this comic book, which I created like when I got out of high school. So it's basically just me vomiting up all the pop culture and bad television and bad movies and comic books and just all of that crap that I've absorbed over the years.
What sort of role do you think horror plays in pop culture to begin with?
There's two types of horror viewers. There's the people who identify with the victims and there's the people who identify with the monster. And both of those are important because it's a cathartic thing. Mm-hmm. Like I can be really pissed off all day long at like watching all the jerks, the straights, the normies, the, you know, preppy jerks I have to deal with when I'm driving around Dallas.
You're not a norm preppy guy?
Oh no, not at all. What makes you tell? Instead of going out and like going postal on these people, I can go home, throw on a Friday the 13th movie, watch Jason kill these guys for me, and it's okay. The stress is relieved. Now for the people who identify with the victims, it's also a cathartic thing because this allows them to confront their fear, which usually of the freak, the outsider, people like me. And, you know, they're able to deal with this. They're able to confront the unknown, basically, and they get that out of their system. A lot of these people who write horror, they have these, I guess, for lack of a better word, demons inside of them they have to get out. And, you know, people like me, I think a lot of times it's basically we just like to gross people out.
What advice would you have for the person breaking into the industry in terms of finding the right collaborator and working with that person?
Well, the internet has really changed the way the business is set up. I think that is really the most important tool to finding someone that you can work well and work well with. If you're a writer like me, you need to find an artist or artists that will suit your story. You need to find, and if you're working with multiple artists, keep a consistent look. So there's a house style that will be associated with your comic. I think it's also important if you're trying to break in, and I can't say this enough, do not start out with print. Start out doing a webcomic. Build your fan base up, then go the print. Because you see so many indie comics come out, they try doing a print thing right out of the door, and they'd only last like a couple issues because it costs so much money to print this stuff out. You need to, see if there is people who are wanting to read what you're putting out. And the world is big enough that odds are if you do something and do something well, then there will be people who will want to see what you have to say. Don't expect to get rich. If you're doing comics and that's your career, you're doing it because you love it. I mean, you can probably count the number of comic book millionaires on one hand, and those guys all probably got rich, not off the actual comics, but probably merchandising, movies, cartoons, that sort of shit, most of which are awful.
Up next, Scott Kurtz of PvP.
Scott, good to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Give me a quick rundown of what PvP is and who the characters are, what the basic premise is.
PvP is a comic strip about being a geek in your 30s, never really having outgrown the follies of your youth, and hanging around with people of the same ilk. So it's really kind of a, if you know a nerd or you are a nerd or you live with a nerd, you'll appreciate the strip.
When did you first start doing PvP?
Started in 1998. May 4th was the first appearance of the strip.
What spurred you into creating comics in the first place?
Well, I've been drawing since I was a very little kid, but when I was in the 4th grade, my mom bought me the first Garfield book.
Okay.
And I was hooked, and I decided from then on that I was going to be a professional cartoonist like Jim Davis was. My uncle worked at Cabrillo College in California. He was a career counselor, and he sent me an article that he had from school about different careers. He had a Jim Davis article, and it talked all about how he got started and what his process was, and I was just addicted. I was hooked. So I've been creating my own comic strips since then.
Huh. What kind of methods, what kind of motivation do you use to keep yourself on that deadline?
I never miss a day. I don't ever want to have a day go by where I don't have a new strip up. So the promise to the readers is one new strip for every day. And some days I get it posted at midnight that day, and sometimes it's almost midnight the following day. But if I have a bunch of ideas, I can knock 5 or 6 of them out in a day if I have them written. But the biggest holdup for me is getting the idea, writing it. I don't like to put a half-baked idea or almost the perfect gag up on the site. So I tend to panic, and then at the last minute it just kind of comes to me, and then it's a rush to get it up.
The question I'm dying to ask you, you pretty famously spoofed the small press and industry in the Graphomaximo story.
Right.
And but you're here and you're helping anchor a new small press show. Can you give us maybe what are your thoughts on like the small press and the do-it-yourself kind of ethos?
Well, the whole Graphomaximo storyline, which is what you're talking about, was kind of my commentary on not the small press necessarily, but a mentality that kind of circulates around some alternative crowds where it's kind of an air of pretentiousness that their art is somehow more valid than everyone else's art. And that's really what I was spoofing there. I kind of lost my way a little bit as I was going through the spoof and started taking shots, but I love the small press. I love the idea of someone loving to draw comics and they draw it and they go down to a Kinko's and print it out. And these small press expos, like Staple, are some of the only cons you can go to where the whole theme of the convention is comics.
Right.
And I miss that.
What advice do you have for guys who might want to follow in your footsteps? What are some of the key things you think to making this work?
Well, first and foremost, make sure that you have the best comic book / comic strip that you can make. Put your all into it and write for yourself, make yourself the audience, and draw and write comics that you would want to read. The audience will find you. Don't worry about pandering to anyone. Once you have something that's really good, you can go places with it. People will want to read it.
Terry Moore is the creator of Strangers in Paradise, one of the world's most successful independent comics. His interviewer is Bob Riley. He and his wife Rachel were our first customers of the day.
We're at Staple in Austin, Texas, and this is Terry Moore, creator of Strangers in Paradise. Terry, you came to comics via somewhat of a circuitous route. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in music and advertising and how that led to a career in comics?
My first career was 10 years as a rock musician, playing lead guitar in a band around Texas. And when I decided to leave music, I went into television editing, working with computer random access edit systems. And that's where I learned how to tell stories with small moments of scenes and footage, and to stare at actors and performances and think about story flow. I did that for another 10 years. So I was in my mid-30s before I realized that I was tired of doing that, and I was looking for something more creative to do with my art. And I rediscovered comics. I walked into a comic book store and saw this self-publishing boom going on, and I thought, man, that looks fun, I can do that. So I started drawing up a comic and submitting it, and next thing I knew, I was in the comic book industry. I never saw that coming. So it kind of happened late for me in life, but I'm glad I'm here.
What was that process like? How hard did you have to work to shop it around and finally get it accepted by Antarctic Press?
It took me about 1.5 years to make things happen. Once my interest was ignited, I began to do a lot of research. I spent about 1 year researching the industry, learning how it works, trying to learn what the self-publishers were doing, what was the difference between them and Marvel, what's the difference between mainstream and the alternative press, plus learning how to set up your own little company, how to self-publish and what's required to do that. It looked to me like it was all pretty doable. And everybody that was self-publishing were people just like me, just these lone wolves that had one idea and they wanted to publish it, and maybe it's not perfect for Marvel or DC, but a lot of people would like to read it if you could just get it out there. So I took my first book that I drew and I sent the samples out to all the companies, and they all sent back reject letters. And the only call I got was from Antarctic Press. They offered to do a miniseries, and I thought that was a good way to start.
You managed to keep control over the rights to the characters?
Oh yeah. That was never an issue. By that point in time in the industry, a lot of creators had already established creator-owned rights. So anytime I was talking to people, it was not an issue.
When did you decide to do it full-time?
I got into comics wanting a full-time career. I mean, I wanted out of my day job as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. It took me 18 months of doing both before I could quit my day job, and the comic became involved enough for us to devote our time to it.
What's that like, trying to do a day job and then do your comic at night?
It was not easy because my day job was not a 40-hour-a-week job. It was this constant binging lifestyle. You just work around the clock. It's like working on a movie crew. You never have any time to yourself when you're on a movie crew. And editing in a post facility is the same way. You have no private life. So I was drawing. I'd get home at like midnight and have to draw about 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night, and then be back at work at 8 in the morning. So it was very difficult to get the first few issues out. Plus, for some reason, we were moving a lot at that point in our life. The first 4 issues of Strangers in Paradise, I lived in 4 different houses. So, and I was trying to crank this thing out bi-monthly. It wasn't easy.
At what point did you feel like it might work?
After the Antarctic miniseries, I took 9 months to prepare and launch my own self-published series through my company. When I solicited the first issue, the orders for that were 10 times higher than they had been for Antarctic Press. The very first issue of Strangers in Paradise with Antarctic Press, my orders were, I think, 2,300. And the very first issue on the Abstract Studio series was 10,300. And I realized, okay, this will work.
Mm-hmm. Why the move to Image, and then why the move back to self-publishing?
I went to Image because Jim Lee called me, and he called me at the right time. The thing about self-publishing is that the more you do it, the harder it gets. If it becomes successful, if the book catches on, then you have a lot of business to take care of with the distributors and the printer and the shipping and the tracking of inventory and then the billing. And it's just, suddenly you have a real business on your hands. And I'm not a businessman, I'm a cartoonist, My goal is to sit at the drawing table all day, that's what I do. And so all this business stuff was just bogging me down. Then Jim Lee gave me a call and said, okay, we're going to launch a creator-owned line of comics called Homage. And we'll take care of all the business and you can just draw. How does that sound? And I said, sounds good. So I went and did that and helped launch Homage with James Robinson and Kurt Busiek. But after about a year, I had been able to convince my wife, Robin, to come into the business with me. And when I decided to come back to self-publishing, we had a whole big business team all set up with CPA and lawyers and contract negotiators and my wife running the business and all that stuff. And now all I do is I just sit at the drawing board and I just draw. And I have the support team of business people that take care of all the adult stuff. If it was just me, I would be still at a kitchen table somewhere, just drawing my little stories, I think, you know, and just hoping somebody might find it by accident. That's nice, but, you know, it's not a business, so I had to get business people who would push it out there and make the world see it.
Now, you've been doing the book consistently since 1993 with pretty much no break at all. You've either been putting out the comic either monthly or every 6 weeks. How do you maintain that kind of discipline in the creative process?
Most of the time, I'm motivated. Most of the time, I want to read the next issue. I'm doing it because I want to see it. I like making the pictures, I like drawing the scenes and living with the characters. So most of the time, it's a very good situation. I'm doing it because I wouldn't want to do anything else. Sometimes I'm just being tenacious. I'm a little burned out and I'm working through it, just like everybody else. So, I don't know, when you're in it for the long run, you just hope for a good batting average.
One of the more controversial aspects of the book was about 3 years ago, you revealed several scenes and aspects of the future of the characters in Strangers in Paradise. And from the fan base, you took a lot of heat for that. How do you deal with that kind of criticism and also tell the story that you want to tell as opposed to the story that the reader might necessarily want to hear?
As a writer, I'm very aware of the American short story style and what American readers expect, and you know, the Campbell stories and the syndromes and the hero syndromes and all that. Well, that's all good and well, but I'm also looking for a new way to tell a story. I think that as the writers of today should find new ways to tell stories that are not so formula. And one of the things I wanted to try to play with was, okay, I'll tell you the ending, because that's not the point of the story. The point is the journey. So it's, to me, revealing a little bit of the future of the story was like saying, okay, we're all going to get in the car and go to New York. So it's no surprise where we're going, but the surprise is the road trip. And that's what I'm trying for on that. I caught a lot of flack for it, though. It's amusing that people could be so wrapped up in fictional characters that they would have a passionate response. They hold me responsible for the welfare of my characters now. There's a social syndrome where if you make these fictional characters and it's an ongoing story, people begin to take them into their hearts and embrace them. And now your role as a creator is don't screw them up. You know, it's like James Bond or Sherlock Holmes. You know, we expect Arthur Conan Doyle not to come out with an issue where Sherlock Holmes turns out to be a complete loser, you know. We have expectations. So at some point your characters become bigger than you are. And it's a relationship between the public and them. And I'm just kind of the guy behind the curtain.
Any final advice for anybody trying to break into the business?
Just push really hard and keep meeting people and introducing yourself and letting everybody know what you're trying to do. Because you never know who you're going to meet today and what new option they may bring into your life. And a lot of times people's lives and careers can change on something that they never pre-planned. It'll be because they met somebody they didn't know this morning, or something comes their way during the day at a convention like this. So just get out there and keep pushing and let everybody know what your dream is, and you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help you.
It's Farmer Us and I'm Shannon Wheeler, breeder of Too Much Coffee, man!
Shannon, you are a self-published creator of comics. Why don't you tell us about how you got your start in the whole comics world?
Let's see. I guess I was drawing a daily comic strip when I was in college. And then when I moved to Austin, I kind of fell in with people that were drawing comic books and coloring comic books and wanting to draw comic books. And they really encouraged me. They're like, oh, you got to do comic books. You got to do comic. And I was like, okay. So I started doing longer stories. Instead of doing 3 panels, I started doing 8-page stories, and they ran as mini comics. And then with this group of people, one of them moved into a house that happened to have a printing press in there, and we just thought, oh, we've got a printing press. We can print our own comic books. And so we formed a loose collective of people that wanted to do comics, thinking, this will be our publishing company. And we started putting together little anthology books. And by the time we actually got something together, the repo people came and repossessed the printing press. But then we had the content, so we actually had this comic book. And we got a local comic book store to fund us. And we just went to another printer and said, hey, we want to do this comic book.
The team relationship there, do you think that helped to produce the comic book on time?
It was never on time. It helped produce it for sure, yeah. And it gave each of us the confidence. There's just a lot of fear early on, like this isn't good enough, or I don't know how to deal with the business end of it, or I don't know how to deal with a color cover. I mean, there's all these things that seem very overwhelming at the beginning. Having a number of us, there's 4 of us, we were able just to kind of get over those hurdles a lot more easily, and we had enough false bravado to sort of barrel through it.
Did you find your own way, or did you read about how others had done it?
We found our own way. We didn't really know that anybody else was doing it even. We had no information. We were clueless, absolutely clueless. In that time, I put together Too Much Coffee Man #1, so I had my first comic book, and that sold really well. Out the gate, I sold 7,000, and I printed 10,000, and those sold out through reorders within a month, and then I went to a second printing of another 7,000. All of a sudden, I was making a living off of my comic book. Everybody was losing money except for me, and so everybody else kind of slowly stopped. Everybody else got jobs, basically. And then this became my job.
What advice would you have? What do you think made the difference?
We did a lot of stupid things. Like when we were doing the anthology, it was kind of at a time when there were a lot of gimmicks. And so we thought, oh, we need to do a gimmick. And hologram covers were coming out, and like foil things, and they would have variant covers and all those things. We just thought, we can't afford that. And so brainstorming, one of us, Ashley, thought up, oh, let's shoot it with a gun. It's interesting because there's strengths to working in groups and there are weaknesses. And one of the strengths is you come up with a lot of ideas. But then the downside is that when there's a group, everybody starts poo-pooing ideas. Like, we can't shoot it with a gun because it'll be too expensive. Or we can't shoot it because the retailers will think that it's damaged and send it back. Or we can't shoot it because we'll be liable if a kid shoots himself. It just took 2 of us like pushing the idea, like did the math, put them in stacks of 10, $20 for a 500 bullet. This is totally doable. That tripled our sales on the book, but more importantly, it gave us a buzz. Like we got people wrote about it because it was an interesting, weird, stupid thing to do, and it was funny. Like we were mocking gimmicks. At that time, that's when I started Too Much Coffee Man #1. So I kind of was able to parlay some of the press of this gimmick into, it sort of had a little bit of a attention of people. It was lucky too, it was really lucky.
For people who are breaking in, both on the artistic side, perhaps with gimmicks or showing something unusual, and also on the business side, briefly put, what do you recommend that they do?
At the time, we felt like we're basically getting in the ring with a gorilla. Like there's a boxing ring, and you're getting in there with Marvel Comics and DC Comics. That's who you're competing with. And so either you can try to fight by the rules and you'll get your ass kicked, or you can go in there like Bugs Bunny and like hit below the belt and dance around. Find your own the things that you're good at, that you like, and hopefully what you like will resonate with what other people like.
Now, how has what you like transformed your work and brought you to the point where you're now creating the magazine?
I missed, I self-published the comic book for, 6 or 7 years, and I really missed that camaraderie of having a group of people brainstorming ideas, and to go outside the comic book market as well. I felt like the comic book market, with my comic book, was real insular, and that has always bothered me. And so in a way, doing the magazine, I felt like it was kind of an outreach program where I wanted to get people back into comics, because I think that it's a great medium, and I just love it so much. And I think it's kind of suffering by inbreeding, and it needs a bigger audience. It needs more people to see, like, oh, this is fun. One person can do a whole comic book, and that's an amazing thing. I mean, movies are great, but it's a collaborative process, and it's so expensive that there's not the risk-taking. And with comics, you really can go out to an extreme, and you really can do something unique. It's personal. It's such a personal vision. And that's just, I think that's great, and I think that needs to be reintroduced into our culture.
Michael Lark's the artist on the very popular comics Gotham Central, Terminal City, Captain America, and The Pulse.
First of all, how did you start out in comics?
I started out in the late 80s and early 90s doing a creator-owned indie book that was published by Caliber Press.
How long did it take you to break in, and when did you kind of think that you'd made it?
Airwaves was the first comic I ever drew, and I was fortunate that, you know, when I first started showing it around, I got, you know, a couple publishers that were interested. And so it, as far as like breaking in goes, it happened pretty quick, a lot faster than I expected. I don't think I really thought I'd made it until I started working exclusively with DC, when they offered me an exclusive contract. Okay. And that's when I kind of felt comfortable, like I actually had a job.
You've always seemed, from what I've read, to sync up really well with your artists or your writers. What do you think are some of the secrets of a successful collaborative relationship in comics?
I think that like a mutual trust between the collaborators, creatively, a mutual creative trust between the collaborators is really important. You know, I worked a lot with Ed Brubaker, and you know, he and I just trust each other. I kind of liken it to playing in a band together, where you know, you trust the other musicians to do the right thing at the right time, and both of us trust each other that if something needs to be changed, we'll work it out together. And he knows that if I have to change anything, I'll do a good job on it. You know, I know that whatever he does in the script, he has a good reason for doing it, and that if I talk to him about it, he'll explain it to me. It's really important for all the creators to really trust each other that way, because especially if you can't communicate with each other and you start not quite trusting each other, you start second-guessing your choices, and you start second-guessing each other, and that's just not going to make for a good collaboration.
Do you have any interest in kind of getting back to creator-owned, or doing something you write and draw yourself?
Eventually. I don't know that I'd ever want to do that entirely as my only thing I do, because I really do enjoy collaborating. And at first I did, and at first I wanted to be in charge of everything, but now I've really begun to enjoy that process.
You do stuff like on the side, like sketchbooks and kind of things to kind of keep your creative juices, or anything you do pretty much keeps those flowing for you?
You know, I have so many pages that I have to draw that really, you know, the juices get flowing in doing the pages. You know, I do sketch, you know, for the pages. Mm-hmm. I rarely anymore sketch just for my own enjoyment.
What's your work routine like these days?
I try to keep a pretty, you know, like office hours. You know, I have a little boy who's in school, and so I tend to work, you know, I go to work in the morning when he goes to school, but he gets home pretty early, and I tend to work, you know, up until dinner time, and if I'm on a really tight deadline, I'll work in the evenings too after he goes to bed. In the years working on Gotham Central on a monthly, I learned that the routine is the first week of the month is generally spent doing research and sketches, and you know, just kind of easing into the issue and kind of getting a feel for the pacing of the issue and how I want to approach it visually. And then that kind of, the pace accelerates as the weeks progress, and it gets closer and closer to the time when it has to be into, you know, DC or Marvel's hands.
You have any secrets to pass along on keeping your working discipline?
You know, you just have to do it every day. You have to draw every day. You know, it keeps you warmed up. You know, it doesn't take me as long to warm up when I'm drawing every day. And you know, having monthly deadlines really helps a lot, and also knowing you're not going to get paid unless you turn the work in helps a lot too. And as far as the Pulse goes, I'm working with Brian Bendis, which is great, and I've always wanted to work with him. And I'm doing a book that's the kind of book that comes real naturally to me. Captain America's work, it doesn't come naturally to me to draw, you know, a huge guy in tights with a star on his chest jumping around beating up Nazis. It's fun, but it's hard work for me. And the Pulse, it's just the opposite extreme. It's civilians in offices talking, and I get to do some action sequences in there, but It's more of a civilian book. And so I kind of get the best of both worlds right now at Marvel.
Barb Lien-Cooper is creator of Gun Street Girl and a founding member of Sequential Tarth.
Why don't you start off and just tell us about Gun Street Girl? What is it, who's in it, and what happens?
Gun Street Girl is a webcomic, or rather an online comic, kind of an action-adventure comic, but with intelligence and supernatural overtones. It's about an 18-year-old girl, runaway, named Liz Pendragon, who runs away to London, basically becomes homeless, then becomes a stripper, and then becomes a hired gun for a very bad Irish magician named Eddie Caution. And it's not one of these Monster of the Week sort of books. Somebody described it as Will Eisner writes Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I prefer it as kind of a feminist take on Hellblazer.
What can you tell us about the main character?
Liz Pendragon is really just little Betsy Pennebaker from Dale Street in St. Paul, Minnesota, but she always believed that there was something better out there. She discovers that there is something better out there, but she also discovers that the so-called magical world has the same problems as the real world. You know, you still have to get groceries, you still have to make a living, you still have to make money, you still have to deal with relationships, you still have to make friends and, deal with your girlfriend and things like that.
Is she a hero? Is she a superhero, or is she something else?
She's a protagonist. She's a human being, as much like a human being with all the good and bad. She has some wonderful qualities, enthusiasm and intelligence, but she also has some anger issues. There aren't very many people in the world that are heroes. There's maybe Mother Teresa and the firemen that help people during 911, but mostly there are just people trying to do their best. And that's the sort of people I like to write about. People who are a little more good than bad, but still just people.
Now, how did you get your start in the industry as a writer?
I started out with the website Sequential Tarth. I was a founding member. I did a lot of reviews, I did a lot of columns, and then I did a column over at Silver Bullet Comics. I met a lot of people in the industry, a lot of writers, and they would read my stuff, just my online stuff, and say, wow, you can write. You should be writing comics. They said, yeah, your scripts are really good, because I started writing scripts, and I started showing them around, and it was difficult to even get your foot in, because one editor said to me, we all know you're a very clever girl, Barb, but this is a very difficult industry to get in. Pat, pat, pat. Well, I'm not the type that takes a very clever girl for an answer. So finally I decided I'm going to write something that really shows what a woman author can do in the 21st century in comics. And that's how Gun Street Girl came about.
Now, do you think that sexism is still a major negative force in the industry?
Oh, yes.
How so?
Let me tell you a little story about a friend of mine who's an artist. She sent in samples under her own name, and they said, sorry, there are no jobs. These were some pretty major companies. She sent it in under a pseudonym, male pseudonym, and they said, oh yeah, we love your art. Come show the portfolio. We've got plenty of jobs. Goes to the con, and they see that she's a woman, and they said to her, sorry, we just don't have any jobs.
The portrayal of women in comics, do you think that this has improved over the years?
It's both improved and not improved. I mean, okay, look at the Fantastic Four. Sue Storm was basically Jackie Kennedy with a beehive and could never do anything right, and it was always, oh, Reed, come rescue me, and just very 1960s passive heroine. Nowadays, we have like Jenny Sparks of The Authority, who was just really somebody that I could identify with. But the portrayal really depends on the author. That I know a lot of authors that I really admire for how they portray female heroines. Garth Ennis, of all people, his character Kit Ryan from Hellblazer was incredible. Grant Morrison's Crazy Jane from Doom Patrol. These were women that I really identified with. And it's improving, but very slowly. That we still get the babe art, and we still get the women who would never say anything a woman would ever really say.
As a writer, what would you recommend for amateurs breaking in the field, or artists who might want to try their hand at writing? What do you recommend in terms of approaching writing a script and becoming basically a better writer?
Read. Read a lot, and don't just read comic books. Just read anything you can get your hands on. Then start analyzing. What makes this good? What makes this bad? Don't just read a comic and go, oh, look at the cool art. Or, yeah, I really like that because I liked Spider-Man when I was 8 years old. Start saying, do these scripts make sense? Are they logical? Do people act like this? Do people talk like this? And then write a lot for what I call the box. Your first script is going to suck. Everybody's does. The problem is that a lot of people who write their first script decide, okay, it's now a comic. And I've seen a lot of them, and it's sad because I see potential, but it's also you have to practice. It's just like exercise. Writing is a muscle. The more you do of it, the better you get it. Get into a situation where you have to write on deadline. That's one of the reasons why I founded Sequential Tart, was I wanted a deadline all the time where I had to write clearly, I had to write concisely. And I literally wrote thousands of reviews for Sequential Tart. I did about 15% of the material. Yeah. If I didn't become a good writer after that, then I should give up.
So what do you think of the state of writing in comic books today?
When I started reading comics around 94, I thought that comics were just the equal to just about any sort of popular fiction that I'd ever seen, because I was reading Sandman, Hellblazer, Doom Patrol, The Invisibles, all this really great stuff. And it's now more become product and licensing than about the writing. It's really very much about the art. And the craft of writing is actually taking a back seat to how beautiful art can be. And I'm finding that it's harder and harder to find comics that give me that, oh my God, there's a writer telling a story here. I will say that I'm finding a lot of comics from Japan and a lot of comics from Europe that I'm really liking. And the reason why I'm liking the comics from Japan is it's just a bunch of kids that sincerely want to tell stories sincerely, really. And that's very much part of the pop culture, so it's just very accepted. It's not hermetically sealed off like the comics industry kind of became. In Europe, they do treat it as an art form, and I think that's really helped the comics. So either we need to treat comics as an art form again, if we ever did, or we have to get right in the middle of pop culture so we can be influenced and we can influence in return.
Where would you like to see comics go in the next 5 years? What would you like to see happen?
I'd like to see more female creators. I'd like to see it better and easier for female creators. I'd like to see female creators branch out from the traditional, these are accepted female genres. One of the reasons I wrote Gun Street Girl is that action adventure is not a generally accepted female genre. And I felt like, but all of my heroines in other mediums write kind of this hard-boiled stuff, you know, like Patricia Highsmith and V.R. Warshawski and people like that. And I'd like to see comics grow up just a little bit, but I'd also like to see some of the magic return. That I talked to people over the years and they would kind of say to me, yes, I'm still in it because I love this, but it's less exciting now. And I'm thinking, we're comics, we should be exciting, if nothing else. And so that means taking real creative risks. And I want to see people, whoever they are, I want to see companies take more risks, I want to see creators take more risks, I want to see readers take more risks. Whether it'll happen or not, that's what I'd like.
Jessie Garza is the president of Viper Comics, publisher of Daisy Cutter, Dead at 17, Oddly Normal, and other fine titles.
Okay, I'm here with Jessie, and I'm speaking to him. He's the big man behind Viper Comics, some of the best books out there as far as the indie market goes. How did this all get started? What made you throw your hat into the indie ring?
Basically, just before starting to publish comic books, one of the things that we had done is my brother and I were looking to do a small online collectible shop, and it was going to be called Venom Toys. Toys that had nostalgia feel to it, maybe like vintage board games, 8mm films, just anything that we just thought was cool, you know, that you couldn't find anywhere else. In the process of doing that, we kind of had to reorganize, structured ourselves to do the online comic shop, and just before opening it up, I decided to change things up. I figured that if I did that kind of business, it'd be something that we could support maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 people, but I just thought we could do something to a grander scale. And we had already done a business plan, and we were going to be looking to invest a lot of money into it, so I figured, well, why don't we just find a little more money and do something a little bigger? So that's what we did. We did a business plan, got it together, and I came up with a publishing company, and I created a couple properties, I pitched it to a couple people, and next thing you know, I was finding some people to come on board with us, and it was all history after that.
And did people start coming to you, or did you start soliciting?
The company originally started with 2 of my creator-owned properties, and me starting as a self-publisher, publishing my own work. And in the process of doing that, I was bringing some people on board, and at the beginning, I really treated the company as a business. It's always been a business. It hasn't been a hobby, or it hasn't been something I'm doing on weekends. It's always been real formal, structured contracts. Everything is really legal.
Right.
And in doing that, that's kind of helped set a pace for us. I found out along the way that 1, I couldn't write, 2, I couldn't draw, but then I found a niche, which is one of the things that I always tell people, you know, find a strength that you have. Don't try to do it all. You know, if you want to do a book, then don't try to say, well, you know, I can promote it, I can sell it, I can do everything. You're going to initially have to do that. But what you first need to do is get the product. And if you really want to be a writer, then be a writer.
Say if someone was wanting to submit and try to put something out, is there anything particularly that you really look forward to writing, the art style?
The way we've structured the company is there's really 2 main partners, which is Jim Rosnowski. He's the art director, creative director, editor-in-chief. And then there's myself, which I basically am the promotions, marketing. I do all the business aspect of it. The creative does not mess with the business, and the business doesn't mess with the creative. When it comes to the actual, what we select to do, he has full reign of what we're, as a company, going to publish. One of the things that I know, you know, in dealing with him a lot, is he wants to see things that are different. He doesn't want you to have to see a logo to know that it's one of our books. You know, what we started to do, you know, when you see our books now, even with just the covers, you see them, you kind of already have an idea who it's coming from. Okay. And that's what we've been working on, is branding the company and branding a lot of the projects that we do.
And you definitely have it. If you was to say there's one thing that it would take to really, that you have to hook onto and latch onto as far as, you know, drive to get something done, what would it be?
Never give up, which you have to be adamant. I mean, you have to ask yourself this question: how bad do I want this? How bad do I want to do it? You know, you have to ask yourself that question. When you can answer, say, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my book out, then that's what you need. And once you make that decision, then now the hard work is going to start, because now you have to be able to be open to criticism, because nobody's work is perfect, and you have to understand that. If you're willing to put the time in, you know, it could be done. I mean, because I've always believed, you know, anything you set your mind to, it could be accomplished, but you've got to be willing to make the sacrifices.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to be willing to do it.
It's time for the Webcomics Panel with your moderator, Scott Hines of Fanboy Radio.
Let's start with the basics. How'd you guys get started? Let's go down the road the way I asked. Aaron?
Fairview High was an idea that I'd had for a while working for other companies, and I've been kicking it around. And it's one of those things that you got your drawing desk, and on a little Post-it note, you're doing little notes to yourself. And I had a couple other friends that had done webcomics. The ideal goal is to get this to kind of an animated series kind of a thing, but I thought it was a great way to, again, just kind of introduce it to people on the internet and just show them the characters and get some basic small little stories down. But it turned out that people really liked it, and so I've actually been sticking with doing the comic format on the web since then.
I was in the advertising business for about 5 years before I got it. Actually, while I was doing Cause Effect. And during that time, I had met Aaron, who he came by my studio during that time, and we just had the same values and stuff. We became friends, and we decided to put our heads together and start doing a combined website.
I started doing Girls with Slingshots in October. It started off as just like completely random. I was just doing little like drawings of girls with slingshots. It was just like a convention thing for like a year where I was just drawing them in like sketchbooks, and people were suddenly like, "Oh man, when's the comic gonna come out?" And I'm like, "This is just a cheesy idea to get you guys to pay me to draw comics for you, like draw little things in your sketchbook. I wasn't gonna do anything with it." So I guess like a year after, I was like, "All right, well, give it a year. I'll have one in a year." And like I always am, it was like 3 days before the debut date. I was like, I gotta come up with an idea for this.
Up till 1996, my big goal was to get syndicated in the papers. So I was at home, married a couple years, and drawing syndicated comic strip ideas that I would never get the courage to send out or the motivation to finish a full 25 strips to send out. And then my mom died in '96, and I just stopped drawing altogether. And my wife encouraged me to start drawing again, and I put a couple strips up on the net to comment on a video game I was playing at the time called Ultima Online, which almost ended my marriage because we were both playing it. We only had one computer. So there were big arguments about who would get to play that night. But
So
anyway.
that was the basis for the strips with Brent and Jade fighting over
Yeah.
Evercrack?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I didn't even write that dialogue. I just remembered it. So people started noticing it, and this one website offered me, I think it's like $500 a month to do the strip 7 or 5 days a week. And I was like, all right. I didn't even have an idea, but he said he wanted a strip about video games, and so I came back and said, how about it's a strip about the people that play video games, because then I can talk about movies and TV shows, all the things we're interested in. And so that's how PvP started, but it was never like my baby or anything I thought would take off. Then the .com boom happened, and people started throwing money at me like it was like paper. And I quit my job because my wife said, quit your job. If you don't, we'll be 80 years old and you'll regret it and you'll resent not doing it. So I did, and we found a way to keep it going ever since.
There is nothing like the web, because anyone that has an idea and or is just a writer and knows an artist or does both, anyone that has a scanner and is able to get up a site somewhere can do it. And in that way, it's very liberating. You don't have to worry about, DC's only printing superheroes, so I have to draw Batman. Those kind of things. If your interest isn't in that, you're not as limited anymore.
For us, it was always a means to an end, because we wanted to take it farther than just webcomics. But always remember that was our, that's where we came from. And since we started, we took our work so seriously, and we approached it that way. And within 2 years of having it, a licensing agency picked us up, and we've been able to move up from there. So we're trying to help make webcomics even more legitimate art form. What's happening also, Aaron said earlier, anyone with a scanner can do a webcomic. That's good and bad, of course.
It's not always a great thing.
It's going to have to swim through the mess. So there's a lot of, it's kind of like a graveyard out there. Sometimes you'll run into a whole bunch of dead webcomics, and you just got to work hard to... Yeah, abandoned. We run into so many folks who way overpromise on a schedule and never deliver. Excuses all the time, and it just, you really ruin your own reputation that way.
People are smart enough to say, well, he's not updating, so I'm really not going to go back anymore, at the very least.
There's a big sense of entitlement. That's what I love.
Yeah.
There's this huge sense of entitlement among some readers. Hey, we make this possible for you, and like I recently made a post about how if anyone works for Palm, I'd really like one of those cool trio phones for free. And everyone, I started getting emails from people saying, who the hell do you think you are, pandering for a free phone, But the logic of it is like, look, I was reading your website and enjoying your comic for free, and then I saw you want something for free, and I'm against that.
That's a big... We've learned that the web is really best used as a medium promoting your property and making it successful so that you can use it in other channels, publishing, merchandising, things like that. Because, right now it's, people are so used to getting free things on the web. And the minute you slap a price on something on the web, you're going to get a huge backlash.
There's a very "what have you done for me today" thing. If you're every day, you're early some days, and the first day you miss, man, everyone's like, hey, where's my strip today?
And you're right, you also have, like I said, the flip side of that. You have some people who are just your diehard fans. You can't do anything wrong. Yeah. You could put up a scan of eraser shavings, and they will, oh, this is beautiful.
It was done in a way no one else could do it.
But that's what gets you through, I think, when you're really getting started, is realizing that you're not going to make everyone happy. You cannot make everyone happy, especially that you're doing this for free at the beginning, and some people for a long time. And you have to really focus on the people who you're doing it for.
Do not react to the hate mail.
That's
Love the hate mail. Hate mail is all. If you're getting hate mail, that's good. But think about this: like someone read a strip, like it's a free strip, like they read the strip and they're like so incensed. They're taking time out of the day to write you. They are invested. So they're like, do you guys get 4UC letters? You know what 4UC letters? They're letters, they're hate mail, but they're disguised as
yeah, absolutely.
I've been reading your strip for 5 years. I've bought all your merchandise and I've bought your comics. And then today I saw that you did a strip about someone in a wheelchair. And I thought, how could he do this? How could he betray me? For you see, I am in a wheelchair. And you're like, oh, it's hate mail.
You have the hate mail and your good mail, and you kind of keep those in a folder because you can, if you're really having a crappy day, just sit down and read your fan mail, the good stuff. Yeah. And if you want to laugh, grab a couple beers, get some people together, and read how stupid people can be and the stuff they write to you. It's actually very funny. You just have to look at it that way.
Like I got this email from this lady who was upset about the cover for PvP 13, the Christmas issue, that's nothing but like Jade from down here, and it's like her big boobs. She's like, you write such strong female characters, and they're not one-dimensional at all, and they're not sex objects, and you just destroyed the whole thing by focusing on her breasts. And I wrote her back, and I asked her what her cup size was.
That was her.
And then when she said, that's none of your business, I went, oh, itty bitty, you got small boobies.
I've had emails that say like, hey, one of my characters' name's Brandy, and hey Brandy, nice boobs, and I purposely draw them where they don't have any shape whatsoever. So it's one of those things where if they're gonna write it, they're gonna write it regardless, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
I get a lot of creepy stuff from the furry crowd because
No, you get creepy,
I get
creepy stuff. Creepy stuff from the furry crowd.
It doesn't make sense.
Very and really? I try to mine's I really try to keep it pretty fun and cool, but I get some stuff that's just we'll save that for another panel.
They're creative.
Furry crowd. That's like saying you get confusing letters from drug users.
There was this big thing called Keen Space, which was really cool because if you were starting out and you were kind of feeling it out. This is the first time I had a computer in years and years too, so I was getting familiar with the programs and my scanner, and there was this Keen Space place where they just said, well, email them, they'll give you this free site space, and that was wonderful. It was great that they did that because that's where you kind of cut your teeth, is on that site, and they give you space and you put up your comics and you get it seen from there.
If you have a comic and you don't want to be a part of KeenSpot or necessarily a part of Modern Tales, there's no way for you to there's no centralized location for people to find new work.
If you want to get noticed, you will work to get noticed. You will link exchange, you will do whatever, you will do what it takes. And that's why you get those webcomics out there who have made it, it's because they've worked at it.
Proving your worth, even on your own, before the links, before anything else, is a very important part because you're learning some valuable lessons about getting an audience and seeing what they like, seeing what they enjoy.
The secret is that getting people to go to your website is not hard at all. It's really easy, very easy. The trick is getting them to come back. But if the work speaks for itself, you can get a lot of people to come to your website really easy. And if the work is really good, they'll bookmark it and come back. How to make $1 million and double it. Step 1, get $1 million. Now,
win the lottery.
Have a really kick-ass comic,
Live happy.
Okay? Minimize risk and cost. And get as many people to read it as possible, which is easy. And the more people that read it, the bigger number of people is that 1% conversion. Because there's usually about anywhere from 1 to like 5% conversion of people that read your comic will actually buy a shirt or buy a, And the more people that read it, the bigger number that is. 1% of 5 people is not, that's like one guy thinking about buying a shirt and then not doing it. But if you have 100,000 people reading it, then that's a paycheck. I put up a new thing for my advertising where if you pay a real shitload of money, and that is an industry term, it is a shitload of money, and I like your product, you can buy advertising where I will draw 4 comics on every Monday. I'll put up an extra comic that's about your product. And I don't do it often, but when I put the comic up, the comic itself is the ad. A normal click-through rate, meaning the number of people that read the ad as opposed to click on it, is 0.01%. That's why advertising on the net is so difficult. 0.01% of the people that read the ad click on it. When my ad is the actual comic strip, it's 14 to 15%. That's why I sell it free.
I'd be part of that because
that is what's known as a macro payment. Micro payments.
We've taken a more traditional approach with this, in that we've used licensing as our method of generating income for our studio. And for example, we mentioned mobile licensing earlier, also re-syndicating our comics through other websites as well. Last February is when we got signed with a licensing agency that made a huge difference for us, because it allowed us to really focus on making the product while they helped us get our name out even more mainstream than we were. Because one of the cool things that we did was, there's a big show that many people are not familiar with because it's very industry. It's called the Licensing. It's a very simple name, Licensing Show, in New York City. They do every year, and all the big studios, all the television networks, they go out there and they just show off their stuff, what they're doing for the year. There's been stories of people, wanting to switching
over,
and then they get retaliated against, and it's
people
just,
hate that.
It's not worth it. I think that
It's
goes
that
back
sen-
to what
yeah, that comes back to that sense of entitlement.
You can't give into that. You need to do it is right. If it's been free and you want to start getting paid for it, I think you should flip it over, because
Absolutely.
you should make sure that what you're doing is always bringing in new readers. You need a cycle of new people coming in, and it'll replenish itself. You'll always have the diehard fans that stick with it, but it'll replenish itself. So don't ever be, I always tell people, don't ever be afraid to make as much money as possible. Do not feel ashamed, and people will...
Can I get an amen?
If talk about entitlement, people will give you a hard time for wanting to make money off of it, and they will
throw that sellout word.
They'll
It's not selling out, it's buying in.
Yeah, I sell out every issue, bitch. And see, the thing that bugs me is that when anyone that wants to interview me, they always want to talk the business end, because I become like I don't know. I'm getting emails like, you know what, dude? I remember when it was all about the cartooning, and now it's all about the money. And I'm like, do you know what business I'm in? There's no money in this business. If it was all about the money, I'd be selling art supplies, not drawing things. Spent $50 buying pens and paper this morning.
Part of that is a desire to keep webcomics like a grassroots thing. People don't want it to. They're afraid of it
That
advancing.
is why alternative comics people don't make money. That, and they don't write stories anyone can fucking identify with. But
people can't connect. People
But
can't
if they
connect
would,
the.
If they would let go of that whole, dude, it's art. It's got to be like. It's got to be for art, not for money. And I got stories to tell, man. Stories that'll. Man, I'm hungry. Can I borrow $5?
They'll spend $5 on a Spawn comic, but they won't realize that someone else is. And nothing against Todd McFarlane, but the thing is that there are people that do just as much work on their web comic as Todd McFarlane would on a page, and yet for some reason they can't connect the two. That he's working just as hard. I should support him just as much as you would someone in print. But you pay for the site name, the domain. You pay for the site itself, the server space. Aside from, I don't.
You
think,
pay for your
all-
computer.
I don't
you
think
pay
anyone
for
ever.
All less than $1,000 a year, though.
I
That's
don't
all
think-
less than $1,000.
I don't think we pay for the programs we use very often.
A whole
but
year of a webcomic is cheaper than
but
even
then
a
there-
small print run of a print comic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
But it
absolutely,
still costs.
and then there's still.
The opportunity cost of your time. It takes
Exactly.
a lot for good art, for storytelling, that you have really put 1,000% of yourself into this.
When you're first starting out and no one's reading your strip, you're just happy that someone's seeing it. And then if you've succeeded and you're actually making money at it, and it's feeding itself, you're real, it's good. But there's this middle part where you're almost there, right? People are reading it, and you should be, and you're like, you're working a day job, and you're coming home, and you're not having sex anymore because you're drawing cartoons, and your wife's being supportive, and you're like, why am I doing this? And you're getting hate mail. It's really difficult.
As I was growing up and learning animation and really kind of picking it apart and picking apart comics and things, I came up with idea after idea after idea, and I now have boxes full of things that I thought at the time were good, but as I looked at them, like Scott was saying, it's difficult because on one side you should just draw it because you love it, but on the other side you have to look at it on the other side commercially and say, are other people going to enjoy this? Is this something that you think that it would stick? And the reason I picked Fairview High is I just thought that the concept behind it, the name, the premise, the design, I thought that one was one worthy of taking the time, the energy, and the approach to do. And
if you create something and it takes off and you own it and you're in control of it, it is the most exhilarating and at the same time terrifying thing that you can ever work on. It really is. fulfilling is the best way I can put it. I mean, it really is exciting, but it scares it's so scary.
It's sort of like singing in the shower. You have no problem with it, and you're great. No, I'm hitting every note. But the second two people are, in chairs and you're in front of a microphone, you just, oh my gosh, now other people are reading it. Other people are listening to me.
Webcomics are bringing in people who don't care about comic book shops, don't care about the Fantastic Four. They are actually, in some ways, more successful than the comic book industry has been in bringing in people who are just casual readers.
When you read a comic that you like, give it to your friends. Tell your friends about it. If everybody did that, then, because word of mouth is really important. At least the webcomics are free to test out.
You try to make everyone happy, you're going to make no one happy. And you start making it
as well
bland.
do work for hire if you're trying to make everybody happy.
Yeah. So just,
I disagree. I want as many people to read it as possible. I change it from I'm a whore.
When I was a kid, I was watching the Mickey Mouse Club, and I loved that stuff. I loved the old Disney movies, so I was going for the idea of just general audience appeal, but that's not for everyone.
When you connect with someone and they identify with what you're saying, it's lightning. It's electric. The more people that can identify with what you're saying, then the more people you can connect with. And if you start your comic out like a lot of people try to do the opposite. I think that's what hurts a lot of alternative comics, because if your comic starts off with, I had just taken a hit of acid and was cutting myself, and then they're like, days like that? And I'm like, no, I don't know days like that. And so it's very incestuous, because all they are selling their comics to, like if you go to like a really alternative comic convention, it's a bunch of those guys going, yeah, like when you take a hit of acid and you're punching yourself in the face, yeah. Where everyone else is like, when you, took a hit of, and then you just start backing away.
Let's organize our checklist for them on what makes a good a webcomic.
An ingredient you really need that's integral is you got to love it for doing it for you. Because there are going to be the times that you will have someone that's subtly writing, hey, I like your comic, and other comics that update a lot. When are you going to update next? By the way, P.S. Update often, signed yours truly, someone that likes to read comics updated. Really subtle stuff like that. And it gets you down, or something, but you have to love it for yourself to keep going at it. And it'll be at that point, like Scott was saying, that you're almost there and you're thinking, why isn't it clicking yet? Thousands of people are reading this, what's going on? And those are the moments where you have to love it for you, because if you're doing it for credit, if you're doing it for a monetary purpose, if you're doing it for any other reason aside from showing it to people and enjoying doing it, it's going to hinder your progress.
From just a marketing perspective, a name that you won't have to spell is important. I've run into folks who have a great comic, but the comic will be named something really just elaborate, and then they'll have a .com.
How do you spell that?
There's a lot of people on the web that I feel are being held back because they're drawing the same comic strip they created when they were 10. You have to write the strip for yourself, and if people get it, then they'll get it. And if not, then you have to try something else. But what happens is a lot of people don't try anything else when no one else gets it.
You have to have the world's toughest self-critic and look at it objectively and say, if I were a reader, instead of writing this and this is my baby, would I say this is worth my time? You have to, like you said, be your own editor.
I've not met one comic book artist or webcomic artist that wasn't really had a lot of anxiety about the fact they weren't good enough. It's just a part of being an artist. Yeah. I mean, at least the good artists are. All those crappy webcomics you read, those guys are going, man, I just drew this. It is awesome. This is the best thing I'm framing this.
The mentor that I had studying when I was doing animation came from the Bluth school. And, when I was working on the scene, I was just belaboring the scene, and he said, he just sat me down after a while, and he said, every scene isn't going to be your best scene, and every scene isn't supposed to be the best scene. But you try to make them all as good as possible. And I think that's just a level of professionalism that kind of just goes with pushing yourself, where probably everyone at this table is their own worst critic. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because it keeps you pushing yourself further.
Still wouldn't stop you from finishing your work.
You do always have to look and say, is this the best that I can be doing? And yeah, sometimes it's just some of the stuff in your head is not that good and you still have to go on. but you are doing it for an audience who cares about your comic. And that is the greatest privilege of all, to be able to give something of yourself and know it's good and know they're enjoying it too. And that makes you want to do good.
Thank you guys so much for a great webcomics panels. Give them a round of applause, guys.
Whoa, what an interesting panel. That was good. I need to smoke. Smoke 'em if you've got 'em, boys. Chris Moreno created the original Staple Gator. Other artists have contributed their own unique interpretations of the Staple mascot.
Que a palavra do vento nos faça entender. Que a palavra do vento nos faça entender. Se quiseres beber da minha fonte de amor, saiba que equilíbrio é algo tão limpido. Eres pedra e resides no coração da flor, da flor, da flor.
Time for the Indie Comics Panel. Once again moderated by Scott Hines of Fanboy Radio. Give it up for Scott Hines.
No, see, you're here for the panel. Please, that's ridiculous. We know what you do. Tell us how you got started.
So I grew up reading comics, loved them, wanted to work professionally in comics around the time that Image was taking off and people were making millions of dollars having no real big experience in comics. Then I went to work for Platinum Studios, developing comic books for movies. And after about 12 projects getting set up with every major movie studio, if you've ever heard the phrase development HE double toothpicks, that's pretty much what it is. You set up a bunch of stuff and nothing gets made. You know, I decided, well, okay, I'm going to move on from here, but by then we had gotten Jeremiah going with Showtime. I went to work for Humanoids Publishing, and Humanoids essentially started out translating European comics for the United States. My job was bringing in American creators to the European books.
What got me generally interested in comics is I would go up to the public library a lot, and they had a lot of reprints of old Silver Age and Bronze Age Marvel comics, like a lot of the Fantastic Four stuff and Tomb of Dracula, stuff like that. And as I got older, I started kind of tooling around, making my own superheroes, making my own comic books. You know, just generally stapling pieces of paper together and doing really bad drawings on them. So when I got to the big city, I started seriously thinking about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I've always loved comics. Comics were kind of my way of escaping the confines of my hometown, and I started kind of looking around for local publishers, things like that, and I got involved with a company called Maximum Comics and Games, who did some small run role-playing games and did some writing from them. And around then, they were starting to look like they were going to do a line of comic books based on the role-playing game they were putting out, which I came up with the character of Halloween Man for. Somewhere along the way, this project just sort of became way too personal for me to let these other guys have a big stake into it, so I branched out on my own and started doing a webcomic. I got picked up by a publisher across the pond who is doing stuff through Image with Chuck Dixon to appear in their anthology book, Across the Pond Presents, which kind of started out as something just to pay the bills and to get my foot in the door, has become something that I really invested in and that I really love.
I remember my first shock that all those names and credits you see in books actually were real living people. I remember my first credits that I was actually taking notice were like people like Gene Colan and Kirby and Frank Robbins. These people became tangible to me. It's like, my God, these people are actually making money with this. Dude, if I could get a job in this thing, I'd be happy. One thing led to another, of course. I grew up loving art and comics, and I just took a chance and started doing the portfolio routes like everybody else did. And after a couple of false starts, eventually got my first assignment at DC. Then I moved to Marvel. Every major comic studio seems to be on the East Coast. So I wanted to do animation, and I did it for a while, and I've been doing it for quite some time. Of course, some people say it does you, but that's another story. But comics, I have to admit, is still my first love. So somehow, somewhere, when I have those insomniatic kind of evenings, I just the love of comics makes me want to go back. So now, while I do my day job, drawing all day, I come home and I draw some more with my independent comic, Sonambulo.
Came across Sam Hurt's book, and that I read it, and it just really resonated with me, and it just made me want to do a comic strip. I'd always liked comic strips and thought about it, but reading his book, I was like, wow, this is something that it was just so personal and such a personal expression that I just thought this was something that I wanted to do as well. And then in college, I had an opportunity to start doing a daily strip, and so I kind of fashioned my stuff after Sam's and started doing a comic strip called Tooth and Justice. I think I actually got it up to about 10 papers. And then when I graduated college, I just moved down. I felt like I needed to move somewhere, so I just moved down to Austin. And I put together a collection of the comic strips I'd done in college. And then as a promotion, I did a mini comic. It was the Too Much Coffee Man mini comic. And people would look at the mini comic and go, oh, this is really great. And I'd say, oh, well, yeah, here's a book collecting all my strips. And they'd say, oh, is there Too Much Coffee Man in the book? I said, no, but it's the same stuff. It's just sort of a different form of it, the same ideas. And they said, oh, well, do a book of Too Much Coffee Man and I'll buy that.
Yeah. When I was a little kid, I used to go down to 7-Eleven and I'd save all my money from the week. I'd mow lawns and I'd go buy sports cards. One day I just happened to go on the other side of the shelf and there was a wire rack and it had a whole bunch of Marvel and DC comic books on it. So I just picked one up, I looked through it, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I just was really into collecting and really preserving a lot of the sports cards. So I started doing the same thing with comic books. I just started picking one up and one led to two and two led to three, and before you knew it, I had a ton of comic books.
My family's always had kind of an artistic background, especially my dad's side of the family. They're like a long line of, I guess, painters and carpenters, and I mean, lots of guys that work with their hands and that kind of thing. My dad introduced me to comic books, me and my brother at a very young age. So when most kids were reading about the Three Bears and Little Red Riding Hood, I was reading about Luke Cage putting a sweet hurtin' on some punks. But he would also draw. Growing up, he wasn't really shown that there were opportunities for people that exhibited artistic talent. So he, when he got older, he joined the Marine Corps, and. But he was always drawing. We'd sit and watch him at the kitchen table. I was a big cartoon kid, so I wanted to be Bugs Bunny when I grew up. I had my mom give me carrots, with the stalk still on them, and I'd run around the house annoying people. But I really didn't get serious about it until probably when I got into high school. I had always drawn and was always drawing stuff, but I never really had any kind of focus. And there certainly weren't any examples of people doing what I wanted to do, which was comic books. I'd done my own comics, but again, just very non-structured type things, 6-page stories. First page is two guys show up, and then the rest of the pages is them beating the crap out of each other. And then the 6 pages, I'm done with this, and then they just kind of walk away, or, I'll get you next time kind of stuff. As a kid, I thought getting a job doing comics would be great because I would just sit in a room and no one would bother me, and I would just draw my pages and then I would send them away and then I'd get money, or whatever happens when people do that thing that they do. So this is a real eye opener. I was a really shy kid, so the idea, oh my gosh, I have to talk to people in addition to doing the work was a real eye opener.
What kind of living do you make?
Are you comfortable?
Once you become a freelancer, you kind of reevaluate your idea of comfort. Right now, I think for where I'm at, which is very, very early in the beginning of a career, at my age and where I'm at, I think so. I've been able to quit the day job, and
That's important.
I eat at least 1 to 1.5 meals a day. I joke around. I tell people I can't afford artistic integrity yet. I've still got a lot to learn. I still got a lot of things to do. But for where I'm at right now, I figure I'm exactly where I got to be.
Everything we do is really measured. We try to really let ourselves control the growth and not let the growth control what we do. So we're not growing any more than we should.
Right. And Shannon, you've been doing this for 15 years?
No. Well, I don't know how long.
Okay.
Yeah, it is 15 years. Yeah, no, I've made a living off of it for, I guess, about 10 years. The first comic book I sold really well, and one of the tricks that I've pulled is to really diversify and do comic books, which there's kind of an ebb and flow in popularity and sales and stuff, but then licensing, like I'll do something like a Japanese license, and then the Hollywood stuff will happen, and there's kind of an ebb and flow. Like you'll have a little heat, and you'll make some money, and then it'll go away. But yeah, it's you know, I paid rent, and I actually have health insurance now. So
wow, impressive. I love that we're clapping health insurance.
Yeah, we all struggle. I mean, it's not an easy path, the way of the self-publisher, and you know, there's so many pitfalls that you still have yet to face, and then some. With the luxury of having a comfortable day job, which actually still kind of exhibits my artistic, you know, I guess, endeavor. Yeah, it's kind of cool to do that. I'm very grateful and privileged to have that option. But if I had a choice to you know, give up that day job to make Sonambulo a full-time thing, I would do it in a heartbeat, to be honest. I mean, the reason I decided to self-publish is I just love the control. It's a slow path to success. I don't think I'm successful yet. I know I'm moderately successful with the book, and hopefully things will get a lot better in time, of course. But you know, you have to accept the fact that you're going to struggle first, no matter what you do.
I have a very, 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 very lovely woman in my life who's very, very, very understanding and very, very successful at what she does, and she allows me pretty much to pursue my artistic endeavors.
Yay!
Take that, health insurance.
I love you, baby. But as far as Halloween Man right now, I make about as much off of it to warrant its continued existence, and that's cool. You know, I want to take it beyond that. I'm working on some stuff right now that will hopefully take it to the next level and get my work seen by more people, which is, of course, the ideal end result. I don't want to put my name on something that I don't think is a good product, so there's always an issue of quality control there.
You never, when you license and stuff, you never know. Like, you sign it, like they give you money up front, and you sign and say, you know.
I would actually have to get to the point where I'm talking about a contract with some licensors to know that. Thanks for the advice, though.
Yeah, but once you get to the point where you see that it's going bad, and you try to pull out and stop things from happening, people get really mad at you.
Well, you know, at that point, at least I would have lots and lots of money, so I might be able to sleep at night.
You don't have to say yes to the first deal. I mean, there's always room for negotiations. You know, if these said people, this said interest, you know, wants to invest in your idea, you know, make them work for it. You know.
So if you're going to sell out for good money.
Sell out for a really good deal, basically.
Well, also, no, there's no such thing as a really good deal until you've been screwed a few times.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get the, you know, until you've made a lot of money for a lot of people, you're not going to get a good deal.
The idea of selling out is also kind of a nebulous thing. I mean, how do we define that? I mean, that can differ from person to person, and you know, like personally, like I think the idea of like a line of action figures, a lot of people would view that as selling out, and I would think that was pretty cool.
There's the creative sellout, and then there's like the literal sellout where you just bank.
Yeah. Right. Take my
It would have to
song,
be a
use it
lot
in
of money.
100 commercials. I essentially worked in Los Angeles for about 8 years in the creative field, getting paid by somebody else. So I was doing okay, but I was doing a little bit of publishing here and a little bit of publishing there, and not being able to do a lot because all my creative muscles were spent at work, which I'm sure you know about. There are times when you come home and it's like, I just don't have any energy left for this. So I essentially took a big risk, and part of that was moving to Austin. It was, I mean, I realized I could never do this if I lived in LA because you can't afford to do it. So I was able to literally take advantage of the real estate market in Los Angeles, sell a house, move to Austin, and have a little bit of money set aside to pay myself while I get work. So, you know, right now I'm talking to a lot of different publishers, and I expect that I'll get a little bit of work here and a little bit of work there, and that'll help me get more work, and that'll help me get more work. And in a few years, I'll be comfortable. But right now, if I didn't have a little money in the bank, I'd be lucky if I could get some NyQuil and ramen noodles.
As far as self-publishing goes, I mean, I'm working for self-publishers, and the self-published projects I'm doing have actually found homes at places. I think what it basically comes down to is how much of it you're doing yourself. I mean, I don't know if it necessarily has to do with where the money's coming from, but I think a lot of it has to do with the creative vision of the book. How much of it is being controlled by the creators?
People have projects that either they've been working on, like writers may have been working with an artist, or an artist is working with a writer. They've been doing the whole job. They've been writing, illustrating, and they've been trying to get a break. Have someone who can actually just publish it and put the book out for them. So what they've done is they've come to us, or in some instances we've gone to them and talked to them, and we're basically going to publish the book for them. And what we do is we become like joint partners with them. And in doing that, we try to do a full service where the writer or the artist can focus on doing the artwork or doing the creative aspect of it, and not have to worry so much about printing deadlines or having to front the money for the printer or for a promotional aspect of it. And so that's basically what we do. We'll handle all that for them. Make sure that the books are picked up by stores. I get a lot of free signed copies out to them. Make sure that they know what we're doing, and give them samples of the books, because I used to own a store, so I know how it is to invest money in a product you've never seen.
Right.
I mean, your resources are limited, so you have to make sure that each amount of dollars that you allocate towards something, you get some in return from it.
Yeah.
Which is really hard, for a lot of stores. I mean, you got to make sure it's well invested.
I love superhero books, and I hope to do some work here and there for DC and Marvel, and some stuff for Dark Horse and that kind of thing. But the big focus for me is create a property that either I own or where I work with some kind of a publishing house that is going to maybe, like Viper, manage part of it for me, and then they're going to take a piece of it in exchange for them managing part of the headaches for me. But ultimately, I want to have a property where I have a big piece of it, because I have experience in the movie industry, and I have experience in setting up projects for film or TV, and I have connections there. So the hope is that 1 out of every 5 or 10 things gets set up, and you get an option, and that's a little bit of money. And then maybe 1 out of the 10 things that you do gets made, and then that's a lot of money. But it's very much a long-term plan. And I've talked to a lot of writers who essentially, when they approach their writing, they look for where they get the best royalties deal. There aren't a lot of 50, 60-year-old comic book writers out there. So even when I'm too old to write, or to get work at least, I've still got an income. And when I'm dead, my kids are still going to have an income.
Shannon, it seems like you are living the dream of the sole self-publisher through and through. I mean, 100%. I don't know many people that physically staple, like 15,000 actual comics, and then that lead to a successful magazine.
I mean, there were mini comics, and there were actually 2 staples in each. So it was a lot of...
Yeah, get your calculators out, guys.
So did you just go to the Sam's Club, get the massive stapler?
I got a long reach stapler, and I watched a lot of miniseries that I would rent from Vulcan Video.
That's awesome.
The month that I solicited my first comic book was the month that had the most comic books ever solicited at 1 month, and everybody was like, "Oh, don't do it," and I was like, "I got to do it. I just got to. Otherwise, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it." I needed to get it out by San Diego Comic Book Convention, and I think when I was soliciting it too, I'd maybe drawn 1 page of it. I don't know. But back then, now I think you have to have 3 issues done, and before they'll let you solicit. But back then, you just give them a cover, and you just give them a short description, which you write yourself.
I think it's how much effort are you putting into it? I mean, God bless those that actually get picked up by a publisher, even Image, who they give you the luxury of their big promotional monster market and everything.
But they charge you for it now,
too. Yes, they do charge you.
And if you don't meet the minimum, you're paying for your book, is what I heard.
Exactly. There's pitfalls that you have to be aware of when you decide to sign your soul to a certain devil. I remember Dark Horse offered to pick up Sonambulo. I think the first year was out, and I considered it, and I realized, that I don't think, because at the time I thought the character was just too weird. I mean, in Mexico, mass Mexican wrestlers it is actually the mainstream of things. I mean, it is the equivalent to the superhero there. But in America, it was was like oddball. It was just bizarre, just something. It was probably a fetish to them. I don't know what it was, but eventually I just thought, if I'm going to do this, I've come to the realization that I had to trailblaze a certain market, and now years later I'm noticing Marvel, DC, and Image, actually, when you mention Image, they'll have their own little Mexican wrestler comics. Every year there's like a new one, and oh look, here's this year's model.
The people that are doing really well, like at Top Shelf, those guys that are doing well are the ones that are really still self-promoting.
That's half the job, believe it or not. I mean, drawing and illustrating and expressing yourself is one thing, but man, then you got this plethora of time that you have to start self-publishing and promoting, and that's where the real work begins.
Even if you're not a self-publisher, an independent publisher, it's become so much more evident that as a creator, you need to take a personal stake in your career and in what you're working on. I mean, even if you're working for a big company on a book, that book is always in danger of being canceled. I mean, I want Dracula versus King Arthur to do well. I've got a stake in it, and no pun intended, folks. Thank you very much. No, seriously. But it's not like the old marketing model where it's, well, if we make a good product, people will buy it. They'll just find it. You have to make sure people find it.
For every successful indie comic or small press comic, there is tons that don't even make it past the first issue. While it was a webcomic, you can do everything on the cheap, and you can actually get a fan base. And by the time I did start doing stuff in print, there was a fan base there that had been built up, and they would buy the stuff when I spent money on printing it, or when someone else puts money behind it to print it. And when you're doing anything that's not through a major company, you do have to hustle. You have to get out there. You have to shake the hands. You have to do conventions like this one. You have to do, all kinds of things, really. Message forums, email groups, anything you can do out there. It's really guerrilla marketing. What I used for a lot of influence in how I marketed it was I looked at a lot of the local bands in Dallas, and I saw that you would just have these guys that would drive around town. There was this band, Ghoultown, and I think they're still around. They just went around town when they first started doing shows and just put their stickers all over the place, put them on stop signs.
Their own cars.
Yeah, everything. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I went around and did the exact same thing, and I got a ton of hits on my site just by doing that.
As far as promotions go, I've had many years in the industry to make friends with a lot of people who do news and that kind of thing. And so for me, I feel like, great, the company can promote as much as they want, but I want to get out there and promote my own book. There was nothing better than being an editor and having my writer or my artist call me and say, hey, such and so wants to do an interview with me about our book. Is that okay? And the answer is always, of course that's okay. And the more the creator does, the better for the book and the better for your publisher if you're working with a publisher. And I don't care if it's a little publisher with no money for promotion or if it's Marvel or DC. They want you out there. They want you saying, buy my book.
If you've got a good idea and you really feel that it's a good idea, do whatever you can to get it somewhere that people can see it. Because odds are somebody else has the same idea. And, even if you came up with it first, if somebody else puts it out first, you'll always be known as, oh yeah, you're the guy that did the book like so-and-so did.
Yeah, there's a reason that 2 Volcano movies come out at exactly the same time, And in fact, I was telling Chris, a writer that I have worked with wrote a screenplay that was essentially Dracula versus King Arthur. I'm sure the stories diverge greatly, but,
Yeah, initial impression.
Exactly. People come up with the same ideas sometimes.
Yeah. You snooze, you lose.
When somebody stole from me, then I called them up and said, hey, this is bad form, and they said, oh, well, you and your little comic book, blah, 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 and I was like, well, I think this is bad. You're doing a comic called Too Much Coffee, and it's sort of similar, and they said, well, if you really think it's similar, then have your lawyer call us, and then I had my lawyer call them, and I made a bunch of money.
Happy ending.
Lawyers are your friends.
And then we did the copyright and trademark.
There you go. After the fact.
Yeah, close the barn door.
You mentioned printing before, and that always feels like a huge bill if you're thinking about doing self-publishing? I mean, even just the mini comic. What are the costs
Well,
these days?
some print-on-demand houses, they have pretty good deals. I know a lot of printers, even small-town local printers, are making deals for people that are making comics. I mean, every show I go to, I get handed at least 10 samples with ads on the back that say print-on-demand services, very reasonable rates.
Also, at conventions, I'm constantly being approached by local printers too. Hey, man, we got this little thing. We can actually do print on demand, and what your said cost will be this much. As compared to what you do. Yeah, I mean they're out there, man. I mean just keep an eye.
You can put out a comic book for under $1,000.
Oh, totally.
How many?
20, 30.
It depends on your per unit cost, basically what they offer. It depends on what their paper costs them.
And it's
and
also
what
a
it takes to
weird
run
question.
The offset printers.
It's also a weird question because kind of everyone has their own favorite printer that gives them a great rate. You don't want to give.
Or their weird
information out.
method, right? Like whatever works for you. It's like, you go down the street, talk to this guy, and he'll hand you a card, and then you bring your pages that are finished to the guy, and he'll ask you to walk like a dog. And I mean, like everybody's got a way that they think is the best way. But I'll tell you, the web is really even the playing field because how much are costs for publishing on the web?
I get people from all over the world. I have people from Australia, I have people from Japan, I have people from England. I mean, right now, even with just the people who actually I work with on the comic, but the guy who edits is from England. I'm working with an artist from Australia, and I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that without the internet. And the internet has really changed the way everything is with comics. It's really kind of this is going to sound bad, but let the lunatics become in charge of the asylum to a degree. I mean, not everybody can do it good, but I mean, it's getting to the point where anybody can do it.
There's such a thing called as printer brokers, and what you do is you fill out your specs of what you want, and you say, this is what I want. I want a 32 or a 24 page, black and white, full color, and I mean research it too, so find out what kind of paper you want for your book. Do you want matte? Do you want 70 pound? Do you want 60 pound? Do you want offset? Select what you want. Go to one of these brokers. Give them your information and say, hey, find me the best rate, and they will do that for you. They will sit and they'll send out all these bids. And it may be overseas where your price is at.
Actually, when I was at Humanoids, before we did our deal with DC, we print the big hardcover books. Those were actually printed in Belgium because even after you added up the cost of shipping the books to the United States, you still saved money.
But one thing about finding a printer that is local, you might spend $500 more, but if you're starting off, one thing that you really need is education. If you find somebody that you like, I think that's worth $500. Somebody that a personality that agrees with your personality, where you are down there and you learn from them what a 4-color process is, how to deal with trapping and some of these little ins and outs that are really different from doing a webcomic.
I've worked with artists who don't turn in books or pages that they're supposed to turn in for months on end. And I talk to them about it, and it's like, well, I really had to get this detail in here. I really wanted to work on this. And I get the page, and I look at it, and it's gorgeous. But once you reduce it down to comic book size, you can't see any of the details that they put in there. Yeah. If you want to produce something quickly, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. If you want to perfect it, the sacrifice is time.
I said the bottom line is you're never going to be 100% satisfied in what you do. I mean, I think almost everybody who does anything creative is trying to almost impress some sort of invisible audience. And see if there's an audience out there for it before you worry about impressing anyone.
It'll always be filled with shame.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really the thing that mainstream or non-independent, non-self-publishers have over us is they have paid editors there to critique the creators and make it, quote unquote, a better piece of art.
I mean, I thought publishing a book with Dark Horse that I would have editors coming in and really improving my stuff, and they're mostly traffickers. The other professionals that I've talked to have said that they're mostly just trying to get the writers to get their stuff done, hook it up with the artist. I mean, the quality is a really secondary or tertiary priority for them.
One of the priorities at Humanoids was to have the most incredible art ever, because in Europe, comics are looked at as an art form. So it was a really high bar, and there
As
were a
opposed
lot
to
of
America.
Absolutely.
As opposed to America,
Yeah.
where the
Bingo.
stereotype is, superheroes, and I'm doing a thing and it's going to be a movie. Oh, is it going to be animated? I mean,
And 40-year-old virgins who still live with their mother.
look, I'm going to move out
Hey.
soon, and I don't think that's very.
We all have dreams. Come on. I mean, there are investors everywhere. I mean,
Like local comic shops. That was
Yeah,
one thing
exactly.
We did is we said, hey, we'll give you an ad on the back of our comic book if you pay for the printing, and that's how we put out our first.
or
ad.
even if you just find a store that'll give it a home. I mean, I know sometimes it's hard to find stores, but there are stores that nurture local talent.
Sure. Don't underestimate the strength of the word of mouth. It really goes places. You just have to just be persistent on it.
I mean, set up a website for it. It's just, in my opinion, it's been important. I mean, that's what's really helped us out.
Sure.
It's because that's how you're going to create the word of mouth. I mean, the net is going to reach internationally. I mean, our orders on our website. I mean, I do more on the website on a day than I can do at some convention. Set goals for yourself that are reasonable. Start within your own community.
Yeah.
Get your stores, local retailers, become friends with them, visit them, talk to them, and then, introduce them to your comic, and then hopefully they'll carry it, and it'll start the word, and before you know it, you'll start there and then expand out from there. You find yourself in San Antonio, or you find yourself in Dallas for something, take some books with you, look up some stores, stop by,
Buy them beer at the convention.
Yeah. That also works.
Get them drunk.
Yeah, open bar. Those are the two words most people at conventions like to hear anyway. You get yourself in previews, that's one part of it, but also doing the shows and keeping your profile up is another, because in addition to our diamond orders, we also had people that would just buy the book at the show. And if they didn't see you at a certain show, they just, again, assumed you got blown up or fell in a volcano.
There's still FM International. They do, pretty decent. Then there's, Cold Cut. Then you've got Bulldog. And, a lot of times, some of these distributors, they'll give you a chance. If you send them promotional stuff, they'll send it out. They won't even charge you.
If you see cartoons you like, drop them a line and say, hey, it's great that it's running in there, because to them, newspapers and such, that it makes an enormous difference to them.
They'll say one letter equals 1,000 readers or something like that.
Yeah. 1,003, I think, is up to now.
Oh, wow.
They just revised that.
Words are words and pictures are pictures, but comics are, I wouldn't say the best of both worlds, but they really do become their own things. I mean, I'll read the scripts, and reading that is one experience, and doing the pages and dealing with the visuals, that's another, but I'm always conscious of the marriage of the two. And when it's finally together, that's the thing.
We'll give this wonderful panel a round of applause. And let's also hear for Staple. This has been a great con.
There's a good-looking thing. It's Chris Nicholas, also known as Uncle Staple.
So, Chris Nicholas, originator, founder, father, source of the Staple meeting. How did it go?
I went fantastic, beyond my wildest expectations.
Yes.
Couldn't be more pleased. We had a great turnout. We had great guests. We had great panelists. We had great vendors, great exhibitors.
But what was it that you wanted to get out of this show? What is it that you wanted to bring to light? What is it that you want to make public? What is it you wanted to have people see?
What I wanted people to see was all the underrepresented work in the fields of comics and zine making that it doesn't have, as an audience, a potential audience, but doesn't have a way to reach that audience. I wanted to provide that.
How long did it take to put this whole thing together, from the initial concept up to the show today?
Been working on this for about a year, so I'm going to make sure and put it in a date in the future when I knew I would have enough time to put it all together, get it done, and it took about a year. And it seemed people seem to like it.
Final question. What would you recommend to anyone who wants to run their own show or have their own independent comic show? How do you think they should go about it?
First off, start with a clear vision of what you want. Get that nailed down. Once you get that nailed down, find a place to have it. There's practical concerns. Find a place to have it. And then bust your ass getting the word out. Get the word out to vendors, people you want to be there, and the people that you want to show up.
I've heard it a million times from a bunch of people, but everyone wanted to pass along their thanks to you because they thought this was all a great show.
I have a ton of people to thank for helping out, putting this together, and I'm just really happy that everyone came and had a good time, because that's really the idea.
Uno es como la flor y el agua azul, resuena y susurra la brisa, y es en el jardín aquel donde, y es en el jardín aquel donde la inspiración se moldea como una escultura, trazo por trazo, rosa tras rosa, se filtra con el jazmín, tallo por tallo, clavel tras clavel, florece en el jardín, sentir vida fluir. Uno es el aroma, es sensación, el verde placentero, se siente vida al respirar, es la creación más palpitante y tan palpable, creación en peligro de extinción, trazo por trazo, rosa tras rosa, se filtran con el jazmín, tallo por tallo, clavel tras clavel, florece en el jardín, sentir vida fluir.
Man, I gotta do everything around here.